Mark Sullivan's heart thundered as the garbage truck hurtled down East Ninth Street tires, howling like beasts unleashed. In that instant, time-fractured metal screeched bystanders froze, and across the pavement stood Olivia Harper, heels clicking toward her morning meeting, completely unaware of the disaster barreling her way. Without thinking, Mark lunged, muscles coiling, arms sweeping her off her feet mere inches before the truck's driverless juggernaut smashed into a lamppost. Concrete shards rained down around them as the world snapped back into motion. Screams, sirens, the pounding of a million hearts. In a single breath, a struggling dad and a titan of industry collided on the pavement, a moment forever, immortalized on a viral video that would upend both their lives. Drop your city in the comments below and hit subscribe for more true-life stories of hope, grit, and unexpected heroism. You won't want to miss what happens next at 6:15 a.m. The first pale rays of sunrise crept through the curtains of a cramped Brooklyn bedroom. Mark Sullivan sat on the edge of the mattress, rubbing the sleep from his eyes as he gripped the canvas strap of his duffel bag. The room smelled of engine oil and yesterday's takeout markers of a life lived in overdrive. He swung his legs over the side feet, landing on the creaky hardwood. The leather soles of his boots, scuffed and stained with grease, clicked against the floor as he stood. In the adjoining kitchenette, 8-year-old Emma Sullivan. Mark's whole world hunched over a bowl of dry cereal, her golden braids bouncing with each spoonful. She looked up, cereal-streaked grin lighting her face. "Daddy, do we have time for the bus today?" she asked, her voice bright even before dawn. Mark crouched beside her, smoothing back a stray lock of hair. "We're cutting it close, Peanut," he said, tapping his watch. "But I'll drop you off on the way to work. Sound good?" Emma nodded vigorously, milk sloshing over the edge of her bowl. "Perfect." She shoved another spoonful in her mouth, then asked in a muffled tone, "Will you fix my science project after work?" He smiled, heart squeezing. "You bet. We'll make it the best volcano the science fair's ever seen." By 6:45, Emma was dressed in her pink jacket and mismatched rain boots, her favorite combo for muddy mornings, and Mark hoisted his duffel onto one shoulder, keys jingling in his hand. Their walk to school was a daily ritual 2 blocks through the East Village past the deli that always smelled of fresh bagels and coffee, and around the corner where the street art was bright enough to compete with the dawn sky. As they passed the corner, Bodega Mr. Rodriguez, the owner, greeted Emma with a wave and slipped her a free cookie. Emma beamed, waving back so enthusiastically she nearly toppled the small tower of produce crates behind her. Mark chuckled, handing Mr. Rodriguez an apologetic nod. "Thanks," Mark said quietly. "You're the best." Mr. Rodriguez winked. "Anytime, champ." At the school gate, Emma bounded forward to her best friend, clutching her lunchbox like a trophy. Mark knelt to hug her. "Have a great day, monkey," he whispered, planting a kiss on her forehead. "You too, Daddy," Emma chirped. Then she darted inside, her laughter mingling with the morning bell. Mark straightened and turned toward Carter's Auto and Repairs, his 2-bay garage just 3 blocks away. As he walked, he tensed at the rumble of a diesel engine, the sound of his life in constant motion. The auto shop was already awake, fluorescent lights flicked on in the windows, and mechanics in grease-streaked coveralls greeted him with nods and thumbs up. Morning Mark called Richie his foreman from beneath the hood of a silver sedan. "Got that transmission in yet?" Mark shrugged off his duffel and set it on the counter. "Just got the parts in," he replied, rolling up his sleeves. "I'll have her shifting smooth by noon." Inside, the air was thick with the tang of oil rubber and metal. Tools were neatly arranged along pegboards, each one marked with Mark's exacting handwriting. A battered workbench held Emma's latest art project, a paper volcano speckled with glitter, and beside it a stack of invoices waiting for Mark's signature. He unlocked his office door, a repurposed storage closet with a single desk lamp, and checked the schedule. 4 vehicles for the day, a taxicab with busted brakes, Mrs. Nguyen's minivan in for an oil change, and 2 mid-range sedans needing routine tune-ups. By 7:30 a.m., customers lined the sidewalk, a schoolteacher clutching a latte, a delivery driver tapping his foot impatiently, and a businessman in pressed slacks who glared as Mark emerged, wiping his hands on a rag. Mark greeted each with the same calm courtesy he'd learned in the air guard's steady voice, direct eye contact, no fuss. He jotted down notes, set price estimates, and offered ETA windows, small acts of control that mattered in an unpredictable world. At 800 a.m., Mark poured himself a cup of stale office coffee, grimacing at the acrid taste. He stared at Emma's volcano, propped against the wall, and felt that familiar tug, the promise of something better yet to build. Just then his phone buzzed. He glanced down Emma's school and automated text congratulating him on the punctual drop-off. He smiled, tucking the phone in his pocket, as the first real customer of the day strolled in, Mrs. Nguyen waving her keys. Mark set his coffee aside and sprang into action. "Good morning, Mrs. Nguyen," he said, reaching for the minivan keys. "Let's get you back on the road." As they headed into the bay, Mark didn't know that 3 blocks away, the day would erupt into chaos. How a single split-second decision would catapult him from the quiet routine of oil changes and fatherhood into the glare of global headlines. But for now, it was all about Greece gratitude and the steady rhythm of a man determined to keep his daughter and his community moving forward. Mark fell into the rhythm of the morning walk as naturally as the city fell into its own. Emma skipped alongside him, her small boots tapping the cracked sidewalk in a playful patter. They passed a corner vendor roasting chestnuts, the nutty steam spiraling into the cold air, and a line of early commuters muttering over steaming cups of coffee. The sun had just cleared the rooftops, painting the brick facades a dusty gold. Daddy Emma asked, tugging his hand, "Do you think today's science fair will be fun?" Mark glanced down at her hopeful face. "Absolutely. Your volcano is going to blow them all away." She giggled, eyes bright. "Just like real lava." He laughed, letting go of a small wisp of worry. This walking his daughter to school, smelling fresh bagels drifting from the deli, greeting familiar faces, was everything he lived for. They rounded the corner onto East 9th Street, where the city's heartbeat always felt a little louder. A fruit cart man hollered apples, bananas. "Get your vitamins here," followed by the buzzy whir of delivery bikes zigzagging through gaps in traffic, the riders' voices crackling over walkie-talkies. The city seemed wide awake, chattering over itself in dozens of languages. At the curb by the school gate, Emma paused to tie her shoelace. Mark knelt to help the familiar motion grounding him. "You ready, princess?" he asked. She stood and bounced on her heels. "Ready." He lifted her into his arms for a quick hug, inhaling the scent of her lavender shampoo. "Have the best day," he said, setting her down gently. She waved and dashed inside, turning once to blow him a kiss. Mark straightened, slipping his hands into the pockets of his jacket, and watched as Emma disappeared into the swirl of backpacks and uniforms. Parents clustered at the gate, offering last-minute reminders. The crossing guard waved a stop sign, and the first cars of the morning line rolled past in a slow procession of brake lights. He started back down the block, already thinking about his first customer at the garage. The soft rumble of an idling garbage truck echoed from around the corner, but Mark didn't pay it much mind. There was always noise in the city construction drills, honking horns, the low hum of conversation leaking out of open cafe doors. It was part of the tapestry, as familiar to him as the scuffed floor mats in his old pickup. Yet something about that rumble felt off. His instincts, sharp from years of military service, pricked at him. He paused by the traffic light, hands resting on his hips. The truck's engine revved unevenly, like a tired animal fighting to be heard. He glanced up the incline. The garbage truck was parked at the top of the block, driverless, wedged between a construction barricade and a parked van. Its driver's side door swung open, metal clattering against the side panel. The orange safety lights blinked half-heartedly as if signaling distress. Mark frowned and crossed his arms, squinting at the vehicle. It shouldn't have been creeping forward. Most drivers would engage the parking brake, cut the engine. But this one's engine was alive, the truck inching down the hill as if drawn by gravity's silent pull. A cyclist in an orange vest swerved to avoid the van skidding to a stop. He cursed under his breath and flagged down a pedestrian, pointing at the truck now gathering speed. But no one shouted a warning. Pedestrians checked their phones, delivery riders honked impatiently. Cars edged closer to the moving mass. Mark's heart rate ticked upward. He realized what was happening, a runaway. The garbage truck was rolling toward the school zone, straight down a hill, crowded with foot traffic. He didn't think. The years of training, of reacting under fire, snapped into place. He jogged toward the truck, weaving through slow-moving cars. A man on the sidewalk saw him and hollered, "Hey, watch out!" But Mark didn't glance back. Emma's face flashed in his mind, her tiny hand waving goodbye, the way she trusted him to keep her safe. He closed in on the truck's passenger side just as it lurched over a manhole cover, jolting violently. The driver's door flew wider, its window a jagged void. Mark reached for the handle, yanked the door open, and leapt onto the running board. The truck bucked under his weight, metal groaning. He braced one foot against the rear axle, knuckles white on the doorframe. Inside the cab was empty. The steering wheel oscillated aimlessly. The side mirrors vibrated with the truck's uncertain momentum. Mark yanked at the ignition switch. It was still on. He twisted the key, but the engine protested. There was no time for finesse. A screech of brakes echoed from cars behind. Horns blared. People finally looked up, eyes wide in panic. Mark scrambled through the open door, reaching for the wheel. He twisted it hard, hoping to angle the truck away from the crowded sidewalk. The tires gripped the asphalt, lurching the vehicle toward the center line. He shouted over the roar, even though no one could hear him. "Hold it! Hold it!" The truck yawed, scraping the side of a parked delivery van. Metal screeched, glass shattered, and the truck swung back toward the curb. Mark's arms strained against the wheel's stiffness. He threw his weight into it, pivoting the front end away from the school gate. By the time he forced the truck into a narrow alley, it had picked up too much speed to stop completely. The rear wheels clipped a chain-link fence. The fence buckled, the truck lurched into a stack of wooden pallets, which exploded in a cascade of splintered wood. Finally, with a jarring crash, the truck ground to a halt. Mark's lungs burned as he dragged himself from the cab, swaying with the residual motion. He heard the rush of feet on pavement, people rushing to see if he was hurt. Car horns blared triumphantly. Phones lifted, recording his silhouette against the twisted hulk. A woman in a white coat. Olivia Harper staggered into view, her heels scuffed, eyes locked on the truck's battered front. She looked smaller, fragile somehow, despite the power she must wield in boardrooms. Mark stepped forward and gently reached out, guiding her away from the wreckage. She turned to him, breathless, chest heaving. A single bead of sweat rolled down her temple, mingling with petrified relief. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice raw. Her eyes filled with tears. I think so. Thank you." He gave a quick nod, glancing back at the truck. "You should probably call someone." Her voice caught. You saved my life." A stranger's voice rose behind them. "That man's a hero." "Did you see that?" Mark waved a dismissive hand. "I'm just glad it stopped before anyone got hurt." Olivia grabbed his arm. "No," she said, urgency cutting through her shock. "You don't understand. You literally saved me from dying. I need to know who you are." He hesitated, then smiled weakly. "Name's Mark Sullivan. I fix engines, not egos." She looked at him like she'd never really seen him before, blue-collar jacket stained with grease, dark hair rumpled, eyes calm amid the storm. "Mark Sullivan," she repeated, committing it to memory. A small surge of gratitude boiled in him, relief too that Emma wouldn't grow up without a father. But the echo of tension still hummed in the air, a reminder that every calm had its cost. Mark glanced toward the school gate. Children were streaming out, clustering with parents. Emma's energetic wave cut through the crowd. Relief bloomed in his chest. He turned back to Olivia. "I should go," he said. "Got a little girl waiting." Her expression softened as she nodded. "Thank you," she said again, voice barely above a whisper. Mark stepped back, squeezing his shoulders loose, and made for the school. Heart still racing, the city's pulse settled once more into its normal cadence horns, and voices, footsteps, and laughter. But for Mark Sullivan and Olivia Harper, nothing would ever be quite the same. The garbage truck's engine thundered like a waking beast, echoing off the brick facades and glass windows. Its steel frame shuddered as it descended the slope of East 9th Street, unmanned and unstoppable. Tires screeched against asphalt split by potholes, sending shards of gravel spiraling into the air. From a block away, the mechanical roar sounded alien, a war machine masquerading as municipal utility. On the sidewalk, people froze mid-step. A cyclist skidded to a halt, yanking his brakes so hard his front wheel buckled. A mother shrieked, clutching her toddler's hand as the child's wide eyes reflected the truck's headlight glare. Businessmen in tailored coats spilled coffee onto their shoes, their phones tumbling from slack hands. Every face turned toward the descending colossus, horror infused with disbelief. The truck had broken free of its driver, its cabin yawning open like a wounded animal's mouth. Mark Sullivan's heart hammered in his chest. He'd glimpsed the danger moments before when the truck had rumbled past the school gates, were rattling the iron fence, and sending children ducking into classroom doorways. But now, as the vehicle climbed speed around the curve, it became a runaway bullet on wheels aimed squarely at the crowd just ahead. He tasted adrenaline on his tongue, sharp and electric. "Run!" Someone screamed. It was a man's voice, raw with panic, but so many voices cried out that the word dissolved into a cacophonous howl. Cars pulled sideways into intersections, sending horns into frenzied protest. Pedestrians threw themselves onto building stoops. The city's bustle morphed into a tableau of terror. Mark didn't hesitate. His mind distilled to a single-purpose stop: that truck. He pivoted on his heel, his scuffed boots finding purchase on the uneven pavement. He heard the truck's brakes straining against gravity, the metal protest too late. Sparks flicked from the undercarriage as it scraped a parked delivery van, the van's horn blaring in indignation before the truck lurched off again, crushed fender glinting. He glanced left and briefly saw Olivia Harper frozen like a statue, her white coat a stark contrast against the truck's grimy metal. Her heels clacked on the curb as she pivoted, eyes wide mouth open in a silent scream. She'd stood too close, transfixed by the chaos, ready to be swallowed by it. Time dilated for Mark. He saw her dark hair spill across her shoulders, glinting in the morning light, and felt his gut twist with urgency. He surged forward, his arms pumped at his sides, driving him past skidding cyclists and terrified parents. The roar filled his ears, eclipsing every other sound. He registered fragments of the scene: the fruit vendor's cart tumbling like dominoes, apples bouncing into gutters. A woman in neon leggings collapsing out of a delivery bike helmet rolling into the street. A taxi driver leaning on his horn so hard his knuckles went white. Mark's lungs burned, but he didn't slow. He cut through a gap between a parked SUV and a scaffold pole, flipping a passerby's newspaper into the air. The taste of dust and gasoline stung his nostrils as he sprinted across the cracked crosswalk, the white stripes blurred beneath his feet. An officer 3 blocks down blew his whistle, but the sound was swallowed by the truck's momentum. Within moments, Mark was under the truck's shadow. He decelerated only enough to gauge its speed, maybe 15 miles per hour, now fast enough to pulverize anything in its path, slow enough that human intervention might just succeed. The engine still roared, the cab's glass windshield vibrating under the strain. The side mirror on the passenger door swung like a pendulum, reflecting chaos back at the street. He planted his feet, braced himself. His military-trained mind cataloged every variable slope-angle tire trajectory speed distance to Olivia. He recognized that if he misjudged, if he caught even a centimeter of the tire with his shoulder, it would crush him. But to do nothing was unthinkable. He inhaled cold air flooding his lungs. The world narrowed, he, the truck, Olivia. The rest dissolved into peripheral blur. His right hand reached for the truck's passenger door handle, the chrome slick with grime. His left reached for Olivia, that frail figure about to become a casualty of circumstance. He calculated the arc: if he yanked her from the curb and slammed into the truck simultaneously, he could redirect its front wheels away from the crowd. The final yards closed in a breathless flash. Olivia's eyes met his for a heartbeat wide and questioning. She tried to step back, but the roar pinned her feet. Mark's voice boomed, though he doubted she heard it. "Get back!" Then, propelled by will greater than any fear, he lunged. Mark's shoulder slammed into Olivia's side as he wrapped an arm around her waist, yanking them both toward the street. The truck's momentum shuddered against the doorframe beneath his palm. Metal groaned. The world lurched sideways as he spun his momentum, guiding them toward a sliver of open asphalt. Concrete met shoulder as Olivia tumbled from his arms. He followed her down, not protecting himself, but using his body as a buffer between her and the truck's massive front wheel. His legs collapsed under the force, his chest pressed against the cold ground. In that instant, the truck careened past them, a slanted shadow harboring disaster. The drag of its rear bumper scraped the pavement a foot from Mark's head. He felt the floorboards vibrate under his cheek. The tires thundered on, friction singing as the truck finally ground to a halt against a toppled lamppost. Silence crashed behind the roar. Mark lay for a moment, tasting asphalt in his mouth, chest heaving. He pushed himself up on trembling arms, heart pounding like a war drum. Olivia lay 50 feet away, sitting on the curb, her palm pressed to her cheek. She stared at him with eyes that shimmered in disbelief. He saw the tremor rippling across her coat, the small trail of blood on her forearm where concrete had grazed her skin. He scrambled to his feet, legs unsteady but determined. Pedestrians began to exhale, gasping the breath they'd held. Phones emerged, cameras clicked. A dozen hands reached toward Olivia, but Mark cut through the crowd in 2 strides, kneeling beside her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice rough as gravel. She blinked, dazed, then pressed her palm harder to her arm. I think I'm okay. You saved me." He ran a hand through sweat-damp hair, chest heaving. "You're going to be fine. Just take a breath." Her gaze flicked up, meeting his. Relief pooled in her eyes, and for a moment she seemed too fragile to speak. Then she whispered, "Mark, you saved my life." Mark nodded, suddenly aware of the blood trickling from a long gouge across his own forearm where shards of concrete had met him. Pain bloomed, but he barely felt it, another testament to the surge of adrenaline that had carried him here. Behind them, the truck's engine idled, as empty and defeated as the broken streetlight dangling overhead. Paramedics' sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer. The crowd parted, creating a small corridor of respect. Olivia sat up, brushing grit from her coat. Mark rose beside her, offering his hand. She took it, standing unsteadily. Her high heels clicked across the rubble as she closed the gap between them, eyes never leaving his. "Thank you," she said again, voice stronger now. "Truly." Mark just nodded. He glanced at the gathering EMTs. "They're here. You should let them check you out." She hesitated, then gave a curt nod. As she turned to walk toward help, Mark watched her staggering steps. Then he looked up the hill at the school gate where Emma would soon pour out into the street. He glanced back at Olivia one more time, her white coat now smudged hair mussed, regaining her composure. No words passed between them, but in that mutual breathless silence something shifted. 2 lives separated by opportunity and circumstance had collided in chaos and forged a bond neither expected. Mark turned and jogged toward the school, every nerve alive with the knowledge that while he had saved one life, he had another to protect. His daughter's face flashed in his mind, the smile he promised he'd keep safe. With that promise burning in his chest, he broke into a sprint, racing through the stunned crowd and into the street. Mark's arms closed around Olivia Harper's waist like iron bands. Time stretched as he hauled her off the curb, twisting both of them away from the truck's lethal path. Concrete scraped his palms. Olivia's heels skidded against the rough pavement before she tumbled free and rolled onto her side. Mark used every ounce of strength left in his lungs and legs to shove her away from the monstrous grill, away from the spinning wheels that bore down like a freight train. The garbage truck screamed past them, the deafening roar of its engine a tune for the usual city symphony. Its momentum carried it into a battered lamppost just feet from where Mark and Olivia had lain. Metal groaned as the lamppost bent, sheer steel buckling under the assault. Sparks flew from the collision, sending a shower of orange fireflies across the cracked asphalt. The truck ground against the lamppost in a violent embrace before shuddering to a halt, the front end wedged at an impossible angle. Then, as if released from some cosmic tension, it fell silent. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. There were no honking cars, no shouting vendors, no squealing bike tires. The only sound was the ragged panting of Mark and the distant babble of water dripping from the ruptured garbage can's hydraulic arm. Then a single gasp echoed down the street, followed by another, and soon a ripple of exhalations coursed through the onlookers. Olivia lay on her side, coat sleeves scraped her hand pressed to the concrete where she'd hit the ground. Her dark hair fans out in the dust, and her eyes, those cool, measured eyes that normally commanded boardrooms, were wide with raw astonishment. She blinked, trying to make sense of the nightmare that had just veered into a miracle. Mark dropped to one knee beside her, heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. He reached out, brushing grit from Olivia's shoulder. "Olivia, you all right?" His voice, rough and thunderous against the sudden hush, seemed to belong to someone else, someone forged in fire. She pressed her palm to his wrist, steadying herself. I think so," she whispered, voice trembling between shock and relief. You saved me." Mark scanned her for injuries, the reddening scrape on her forearm, a bruise blossoming near her ribs where the turn of his body had shifted her weight. "Stay still for a sec," he said, his gaze flicking to a rising hum of sirens. "Help's coming. Just take a deep breath." He offered her a small half grin, even as his vision blurred with adrenaline and relief. Across the street, the first EMTs arrived, two paramedics vaulting out of their ambulance with medical packs in hand. They sprinted toward Olivia and Mark, weaving through a crowd, now packed in tight rings of horror and wonder. The lead paramedic knelt beside Olivia, asking calm, clipped questions as he unzipped his bag for sterile wipes and gauze. "She's conscious, breathing steady," he reported his partner, already shifting focus to Mark's forearm, now oozing bright blood onto the asphalt. "And he's got a laceration, possibly fractured radius. Could have been worse." Mark flexed his wrist, grimacing at the pain. The paramedic pressed a gloved fingertip to the wound, then wrapped it gently in gauze. "We'll get you patched up," the medic said, his tone professional warmth. He worked methodically, cleaning, bandaging, treating Mark like any other patient, even as whispers of, "He's the hero," and "Did you see the rescue?" melded into a low roar from the onlookers. Nearby, a uniformed officer held back the crowd with one arm outstretched, his other hand on his radio. "Keep back, folks. Let the medics through." But the barrier was feeble. People leaned in, phones raised, recording the aftermath. A young woman wept openly. A businessman dabbed his brow jaw slack with gratitude. The city's pulse had returned, but it beat in staccato rhythm, awed by what had transpired. Olivia sat up slowly, guided by the paramedic's steady hand. She touched Mark's shoulder, fingers trembling. "Mark, I can't thank you enough," she said, voice thick. Her accent carried the clear notes of privilege and polish, but in that moment it cracked soft and human. He shook his head, wincing as his arm protested. "Just lucky I was there," he said. "You know how that goes." He offered a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes that had seen the worst and now the best of the city in a single breath. Behind them, the garbage truck's cab remained poised against the lamppost, eerily still. A team of city workers and police cordoned off the wreckage, measuring distances, inspecting damage. Under the flashing red and white of emergency lights, the lamppost looked like a fallen sentinel. A soft murmur rose as EMTs helped Mark to his feet, guiding him to the ambulance steps. He offered Olivia his uninjured hand, and she took it, steadying herself. "You should ride with me," she insisted, voice firmer now. "At least let me see you're okay." Mark hesitated, glancing at Emma's school just a block away. Its gates flung open with children filtering out in uniform lines. He thought of his daughter's expectant face. "Nah," he said, wincing again. "Gotta get back to the shop. Unfinished repairs won't fix themselves." Olivia's eyes softened with something like admiration. "You're more dedicated than anyone I know," she said. "I insist." She turned to the paramedic. "Can I ride along, just in case?" The medic checked Mark's vitals and shook his head. "She can come, ma'am, but we'll both need a full check at the hospital. Rule of thumb for any high-impact rescue." Olivia nodded, accepting both the medical protocol and Mark's stubborn resolve. She slipped into the back of the ambulance, recognizing that this was no longer a professional courtesy, it was personal. Mark climbed in beside her, the EMT guiding him onto a bench seat. As the doors slid closed, the world outside pulsed with sirens and whispered heroes. Olivia pressed her head back, watching Mark struggle to find a comfortable position. "You know," she said softly, voice echoing in the confined space, "I owe you everything." He gave her a sidelong look, blood still seeping through the bandage. "Just keep living," he replied. "That's thanks enough." In that ambulance, hurtling away from chaos toward care, two lives, once strangers on parallel paths, sat side by side, bound by a single act of courage. And as the vehicle's red lights carved halos on the city walls, Olivia Harper reached over and squeezed Mark's bandaged hand, an unspoken pledge passing between them in a world of rushed goodbyes. Theirs would be a connection neither would ever forget. The roar of the truck's crash faded into a ringing silence, broken only by the distant wail of sirens. Olivia Harper remained on her side chest, heaving as paramedics hovered above her. She felt the world tilt, her silk blouse dampening with dust and blood, and it took every ounce of her composure to push herself up from the pavement. The concrete scraped at her palms, but she barely felt it. All she could see was the man who'd collapsed in front of her. Mark Sullivan lay on one knee, eyes closed, wrapped in his own pain. His forearm gushed bright red beneath the paramedic's gauze, and yet his gaze never left Olivia. Even as EMTs urged him to lie back, he fought to rise as if some invisible tether bound them in that moment. Olivia's breath caught. He was risking everything, his safety, his dignity, to make sure she was alive. Slowly, and with the air of someone trembling on the edge of a vertigo, Olivia pressed her fingers to the scrape on her sleeve. The warmth under her fingertips startled her. She tasted copper on her tongue. The varnish of control she wielded so effortlessly in boardrooms shattered, replaced by raw shock. "He's hurt," she whispered, voice brittle. A paramedic knelt beside her, pulling her gently away from the wreckage. "Ma'am, let us get you out of the street. You're stable, but we need to check you at the hospital." His voice was professional, but underneath Olivia heard urgency. He glanced at Mark, then relayed quietly, "He's conscious, but needs care. We'll both ride together." Olivia nodded numbly and let him guide her to the ambulance. She could barely focus on the concrete beneath her feet. Her kaleidoscope of heels, her designer coat, even the crispness of her tailored blouse felt absurd here, scattered among shattered glass and twisted metal. Behind her shouts of hero, and wasn't that the CEO, swirled through the crowd. Mark rose unsteadily to his feet, propped by his paramedic. Emma Sullivan. Mark's 7-year-old daughter burst through the gathering crowd in a school uniform too big for her frame. Her ponytail bobbed as she ran, face-pale eyes wide with a child's unfiltered panic. "Daddy?" she cried, slipping through the perimeter of bystanders and kneeling beside him before an EMT could intervene. "Daddy, are you okay?" The paramedic's hand on Emma's shoulder guided her back a little, but Mark gently took his daughter's hand and squeezed it with trembling fingers. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he managed, voice thick. Emma's small hand looked impossibly fragile, clasped in his. "I just wanted to make sure someone kept you safe." All at once, Olivia Harper saw the knot of family that Mark fought to protect. She realized this blue-collar stranger, the man who rarely asked her name, risked his life not to save a CEO, but to save another parent's child, another family's world. Tears stung her eyes. She pressed a knuckle to her cheek, dabbing at the moisture she refused to show. No billionaire rescue doctor could replicate this moment. No corporate strategy could manufacture this courage. The paramedic ushered her onto a stretcher, and as she lay back, Olivia's gaze locked on Mark's profile, strong jaw dusted with stubble. Calloused hands wrapped around Emma's, eyes feral with disbelief and relief. She tested the strength behind her own panting breath. "Wait," she rasped to the medic. He paused mid-strap. "Sir," she called out to Mark, voice cracking. "Sir, thank you." Mark looked up at her, confusion wrinkling his brow. Around them, the city's pulse resumed. A phone camera clicked, tires screeched a distant honk of a car horn. Yet in the ambulance's shifting light, time had paused for these three souls. Emma leaned close, voice small. "Daddy, can we ride with her?" "She helped you." The paramedic exchanged a glance with his partner and nodded. "We'll get you both settled," he said. "Let's keep you close." "Okay?" Mark guided Emma up the stretcher ramp as the paramedic tucked Olivia's IV into place. Emma crawled in beside her father, curling into his side, clutching his good hand. Olivia felt the tremor in both of them, father and child, more real than any boardroom speech she'd ever given. The ambulance doors slid shut, muffling the crowd's gasps. In the compartment's cramped quarters, Olivia watched Mark's daughter stroke his hair, humming a lullaby she must have learned at bedtime. If she hadn't been in a billionaire's shoes, Olivia would have envied that bond. "Olivia Harper," she managed, voice soft. "I'm Olivia Harper." Mark looked up, confusion melting into recognition. "I'm Mark Sullivan," he replied, tone rough with awe. "And this is Emma." "Thank you, Mark," Olivia said carefully, meaning more than her words. "Thank you for saving me." He swallowed, nodding once. The paramedic checked his blood pressure, then Olivia's, and murmured, "All right, you two are stable. We're headed to Bellevue." Olivia's heart hammered. Bellevue, a place she'd driven past 1,000 times but never entered as a patient. She closed her eyes and let the world tilt beneath those red flashing lights. Emma, clinging to her father's sleeve, whispered, I'm proud of you, Daddy. His chest tightened. Hey, he said in a voice that might have carried echoes of war zones where his heart had seen darker days. You're my hero every day. Olivia blinked, surprised by the sweetness of that exchange. She glanced at Emma's sketchbook perched on the seat rail. Simple drawings of family stick-figure hearts, and a figure in coveralls holding a child's hand. Emma's world revolved around her father's strength. Olivia could see it in every careful line. The ambulance rattled through the city streets' lights, dancing across their faces. Olivia found herself reaching out, brushing a fingertip against Mark's arm. He tensed, but didn't pull away. Do you need anything? She asked, voice vulnerable. He shook his head. Just get better, he said wryly. Emma and I need to go home. A smile flickered across Olivia's blood-stained lips. I'd like that, she said. I'd like to thank you properly. Mark's gaze softened with something like relief. I'm not much for dinners, he admitted, but I owe you. The paramedic gave them a knowing look. Don't worry about payment, he said, packing away his instruments. Heroes ride free. Laughter bubbled through the tension, and even Emma giggled, poking Mark's shoulder. You're a hero, she teased. You get all the free rides. The tension in the ambulance eased into something like hope. Olivia stared at the emergency doors at the world beyond that would greet them with questions, cameras, and endless speculation. But here, confined by rushing walls and pulsing lights, she saw only what truly mattered. A man, his daughter, and the fragile thread that bound them in the face of disaster. And in that shared space of shock and recognition, Olivia Harper, Billionaire, CEO, knew that her life had been rewritten not by strategy or shareholder votes, but by the quiet, unvarnished humanity of a single dad named Mark Sullivan. The cell phone trembled in the bystander's hand as the garbage truck barreled past. With a single instinctual sweep, Mark Sullivan had hurled Olivia Harper clear of the metal beast, and the entire world was watching. By dawn, the footage of that split-second act had been shared, reshared, remixed, memed, and dissected across every platform imaginable. On every screen, from Brooklyn subway cars to Wall Street trading floors, Mechanic Dad Saves Billionaire played on loop. Mark woke before sunrise to the glow of his own phone, the notifications flashing like warning lights, videos, tweets, articles. He squinted at the headline scroll. Blue-collar hero, just a dad, now a legend. Mechanic's quick thinking spares CEO's life. Sullivan goes viral. All hail Dad. His garage phone rang off the hook with media inquiries. None of them welcome. Emma, still half asleep on the couch, peeked at her father's strained face. Daddy, why is everyone calling you a hero? He forced a soft smile. Guess I did something right, kiddo. He squeezed her hand before slipping downstairs to brew coffee, heart pounding as he scrolled through streams of praise and confusion. Mark was used to customers asking for affordable oil changes, not invitations to late-night talk shows. And he certainly wasn't prepared for strangers calling him inspirational or the embodiment of ordinary courage. In his grease-stained hoodie, he felt anything but. Meanwhile, in a high-rise penthouse on Park Avenue, Olivia Harper sat at her floor-to-ceiling windows, the sprawling city far below. She'd spent her life bending steel through boardroom decisions, but nothing had ever felt as fragile as her own mortality in that single moment. Now, as the first rays of sunlight crept across the skyline, her phone buzzed incessantly on the glass coffee table alerts about profiles tagging her shares of the video links to interviews where people speculated about the poor man's version of Superman. She pressed her palm to her chest, still feeling the aftershock of impact, Mark's arms enveloping her like a shield, the roar of the truck's engine giving way to a dreadful hush when it smashed the lamppost. She had thanked him, of course, in that cramped ambulance, but now the echo of that gratitude filled her entire being. She rose restless and paced her marble-floored living room in shimmering heels still stained with dust. Each article referred to her as the Billionaire, a label she'd worn all her career like a protective shell, and yet in those seconds of terror, she had been simply Olivia. The New York Post led with a grainy, still Mark silhouette mid-lunge, Olivia's white coat billowing as she fell backward. The caption read, "Unlikely Savior. Dad ends CEO's morning commute, nightmare." CNN ran the uncut clip at 6 a.m., anchoring it with interviews of stunned witnesses. "I've never seen anything like it," one taxi driver said. The guy just dove in without a second thought. A trio of tech pundits argued over whether he could monetize the moment, while a psychologist mused about the primal urge to protect others in crisis. Olivia sank into her soft velvet sofa phone in hand and watched the 23-second snippet again. In slow motion, she saw herself turn at the sound of people screaming, then Mark's face etched with fierce concentration, eyes locked on her every muscle poised to save. Her breath hitched. Those eyes had steadied her, anchored her when the world threatened to fling her into oblivion. She flipped her phone closed, but the memory refused to fade. The urgency of his grip on her arm, the way he'd helped her to her feet, half-dazed legs shaking under her. The incongruity of a well-heeled CEO cradled in the embrace of a hoodie-clad mechanic. She could almost feel his heartbeat beneath her ear. In the corner of the room, her assistant's iPad pinged with another headline. Harper Media Foundation announces medical trust for Mr. Sullivan. Olivia frowned. She hadn't spoken to her board about any such gesture, certainly not before she'd reaffirmed whether he even wanted their help. She tapped out a quick email. Pause all philanthropic mentions. Contact Mark Sullivan's garage personally. Her heart hammered as she hit send. For all her wealth and power, she felt helpless to reach him. To tell him that beyond the headlines, beyond the dizzying rush of viral fame, she was in his debt in the most human way possible. She paced the length of the room, steely resolve settling around her like a trench coat. Back in Brooklyn, Mark parked his truck outside his garage and surveyed the rows of rusted sedans and ancient pickups. He'd taped up his injured arm and patched Emma's scraped knee before closing the doors behind them. Neighbors waved, strangers nodded the world now, watching him as though he'd performed some grand gesture of cinematic heroism. But in the quiet of his own block, he was still just Mark Sullivan, father mechanic, reluctant celebrity. He lingered at the toolbox, running his fingers over worn sockets when his phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. I'd like to speak with you. OH. He stared at those initials, recognition blooming in his chest. Olivia Harper, CEO. Billionaire saved. The same woman whose life he'd shielded with his own body. Emma peeked around the doorframe. Can I watch the video one more time? She asked. He shook his head gently. Maybe later, kiddo. Let's get inside. He handed her a drawing she'd sketched that morning. 2 stick figures, one tall man in overalls, one small girl in pigtails, standing beside a huge cartoonish truck. Underneath in Emma's careful script, "My daddy saves people." Mark folded it and slipped it into his pocket. That night he didn't sleep. His mind rewound that morning over and over. He'd acted on instinct, yes, but instinct born of decades of discipline, of having lived through moments when hesitation killed men on distant runways. He knew that in 2 heartbeats he'd make the difference between life and death. The same could not be said of his own future. At 9 p.m., his phone rang. He recognized the number, Olivia's office. He silenced the ringer and let it go to voicemail. A soft tone, then her steady voice. Mr. Sullivan. This is Olivia Harper. I owe you more than my life. Please, call me at this number when you can. Thank you. Mark sat up. Emma stirred in the next room. He exhaled, then dialed. Miss Harper, it's Mark. Thank you for calling, she said, voice low but unwavering. I want to make sure you and Emma are okay, and apologize for how this has blown up. You don't owe me anything, but I'd like to offer some help if you'll let me. He closed his eyes. I appreciate that, he said slowly. But I don't need charity. I'm not asking to give you charity, she replied, and he heard the gentle click of her closing a door. I'd like to meet you in person. No cameras, no press. Just a thank you dinner, my treat. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the world suddenly feeling a little lighter. All right, he said after a moment. But nothing fancy. My favorite diner on East 9th. Diner it is, she agreed. Tomorrow at 6. Please be there. He hung up, stared at the phone, and realized something, that his life had changed irrevocably, but for the first time in a long time he felt hopeful. The gratitude he'd half expected to swallow him alive now offered him a chance to rewrite his story on his own terms. As Mark stood and stretched, he felt Emma's sleepy head on his shoulder. She yawned. He scooped her into his arms and carried her upstairs. In the quiet hallway he paused and pressed the photo of her drawing to his heart. Downstairs through the front window of the garage, the last glow of streetlights fell on his toolbox, silent witnesses to the ordinary miracles he performed every day. And tomorrow night, he thought with a cautious smile, maybe he'd add something new. The story of a dinner with a billionaire who had the courage to call him by name. That night, as Brooklyn slept under a blanket of distant sirens and city hum, both Mark Sullivan and Olivia Harper found themselves on the brink of a new chapter, one neither of them had ever scripted, but both of them were determined to write together. The sun was climbing over the rooftops by the time Olivia Harper pulled her compact sedan up to Carter's Auto and Salvage. The neon open sign flickered in the dusty window, the garage door half rolled, revealing the cavernous space beyond engines piled on pallets, tool carts, parked like battle wagons, and the tang of motor oil hanging in the air. She hesitated at the threshold, smoothing the edges of her trench coat, willing herself to step into a world that looked nothing like the chrome and glass platforms she commanded. Inside, Mark Sullivan was bent over the open hood of an old Ford pickup, his dark hair tousled, sleeves rolled to the elbow, forearms streaked with grease. He didn't look up when the door chimed, but the sharp click of her heels on concrete echoed through the shop, and he straightened with a slow swivel. "Ms. Harper," he said, voice rough around the edges, but there was no mistaking the surprise in his tone. He wiped a hand on a rag and extended it. "I didn't expect you'd actually come." "Call me Olivia," she replied, stepping further inside. Her heels clicked across a puddle of oil, and she glanced down, wincing. "I realized that dinner at the diner might be too public." He nodded toward the picnic table she'd arranged under flickering fluorescent tubes yesterday, still folded by the back wall. "Makes sense." She tucked her purse under her arm and surveyed the space. A battered workbench, a pegboard of tools in neat rows, a whiteboard scrawled with engine schematics, and half-erased troubleshooting notes. None of it felt staged. It was the real thing. "I wanted to find you here," she said, voice catching on the word. Wanted, not demanded, not assumed. "I needed to see where you work." Mark's dark eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Most people don't." He gestured at the pickup. "This one's got a leaky fuel line and a bulky distributor. Emma calls it her trusty old friend." He glanced toward the office door where Emma's laughter sank in through the glass. "She's around back." "Can I meet her?" Olivia asked, surprising them both and herself. He hesitated, then nodded. "She'll be happy to see you." He led her past rows of vehicles, a 1982 Toyota Corolla with half its battery cables removed, a beat-up minivan with a Kids Ride Free sticker peeling off the rear window, and opened a side door to a small break area where Emma sat coloring at a low table. "Hi, Emma." Olivia crouched beside the girl, who looked up in wide-eyed wonder. "I'm Olivia Harper." Emma's hair was in two messy braids, her jumper belt buckled askew. She held up a crayon sketch of a giant truck and a stick figure. "You're the lady my daddy saved," she announced proudly. Olivia inhaled a laugh. "That's me." She reached out, smoothing a stray curl behind Emma's ear. "Thank you for letting me meet you." Emma's grin was huge. "He's very brave." She hopped off her stool. "Come see my drawing." "Absolutely." Olivia followed her back into the main bay, stepping carefully around a weld spark on a workbench. Mark lingered, wiping his hands. When Emma scurried ahead, he turned to Olivia. "I'm still not sure why you came," he said quietly. Olivia studied the ridges in his palm, the calluses forming a pattern like topographic lines. "Because I needed to leave my towers for something real." She drew in a breath. "Because, Mark, I want to give you more than dinner. I want to give you the tools to rebuild your dreams." He cocked his head. "My dreams?" She smiled, straightening. "You walked away from aerospace, left behind your patents, your career. You said you did it to protect your daughter. But I've seen what you can build, and I'd like you to build with me on my team on my new R&D initiative." Mark's jaw clenched. He ran a hand through his hair. "Olivia." Emma tugged on his pant leg. "Daddy, look." She thrust her drawing forward, a sleek blue and white plane with Olivia at the controls and Mark waving from beneath, holding Emma in one arm. The caption read, "Pilot Dad and CEO Lady Flying Together." Olivia's eyes glistened. "That's beautiful." To Mark she said, She has a gift for seeing what matters even when the world looks the other way. I think she drew exactly what you and I could be. Mark knelt brushing Emma's curls. You're something else, kiddo. Then to Olivia, I don't know if I can go back. You don't have to, she answered, stepping closer. You can go forward. She picked up a long wrench from the pegboard, balanced it in her hands. Here, start here. Help me design the first prototype. Show me how you see the world. He stared at the tool, the weight of it in his palm. Then he looked up at her, meeting her steady gaze. The hum of the fluorescent lights and distant traffic receded, leaving only the two of them standing amid engines and raw possibility. He offered a small, wry grin. All right, where do we begin? Her relief flickered into a radiant smile. Right here, she tapped the workbench. Blueprints come out of your mind. Let's start sketching. They cleared a space, pulled down a roll of butcher paper, and spread it across the surface. Mark grabbed a pencil. Olivia fetched a ruler. Emma perched on a crate, watching them draw the outlines of a new chapter. As the afternoon light slanted in through dusty windows, their lines intertwined metallic curves, air intakes opened cockpits. Under Mark's steady hand and Olivia's visionary eye, a partnership took shape, one built on grease and gratitude, powered by connection and second chances. And for the first time since that morning's accident, Mark Sullivan felt his heart lift, his garage no longer a sanctuary of the past, but the launch pad for everything that lay ahead. Steam curled from the checkerboard tabletop as the waitress set down 3 thick milkshakes, vanilla for Emma, chocolate for Mark, and a perfect swirl of strawberry for Olivia. The diner's neon open 24 hours sign flickered through rain-spattered windows, painting the red vinyl booths in warm pulses. The scent of frying onions and grilled beef lingered in the air, mixing with the dull hum of fluorescent lights overhead. It was the kind of place where time slowed, where secrets found a way of surfacing between bites of cheeseburger and sips of frothy sweetness. Mark leaned forward, his forearms resting on the formica. Around him lay the detritus of diner dining, a plate with 2 half-eaten burgers, crumpled napkins, and a small dish of pickles. Emma was perched on the edge of her seat, hugging her milkshake like a trophy. Olivia sat opposite them, her tailored coat draped over the booth behind her eyes, bright with curiosity. So Olivia began stirring her strawberry shake with a plastic straw. You really do make everything from scratch here. She nodded toward the kitchen door where the cook's silhouette flickered in and out. Mark shrugged, a half smile forming. Our secret is low expectations and high-heat grills. He dipped his fries back into ketchup, then paused. But honestly, everything tastes better when you haven't got a million shareholders sniffing around. Emma snorted, orange milkshake mustache and all. Daddy always says if you cook for the heart, the stomach will follow. Olivia laughed, and the sound felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. That's a great line. Mind if I borrow it? Feel free, Mark said, his gaze drifting to Emma. He caught Olivia's eye and nodded, as if saying, She's my North Star. Then he turned back to his daughter. You want to tell Ms. Harper about your art project this weekend? Emma's eyes lit up. We're painting rainbows on community center walls. She bounced with excitement. Ms. Lopez said colors chase away bad days. Olivia reached over and gently ruffled Emma's hair. That sounds wonderful, Emma. I'd love to help. Emma beamed and turned back to her shake, humming with pride. Mark watched this exchange, the protective set of his jaw softening. After a moment, he took a deep breath and looked at Olivia, his expression more vulnerable than she'd ever seen. You wanted to hear stories, he said quietly. Well, I guess it's time I told you one. Olivia leaned forward, placing her hands on the edge of the table. I'm all ears. Mark swallowed and studied the swirling bits of whipped cream on his straw. Before Emma was born, I was an air guard mechanic. I spent years in hangars checking engines and running missions nobody remembers. It was what I knew, what I lived for. He paused. Then my wife Sarah, she got sick. We thought it was a minor surgery, but the hospital machines misread her scans as routine. By the time someone realized it was cancer, it was too late. She died on an operating table. He looked up, eyes wet. Emma stirred beside him, concerned. Daddy? He forced a smile. It's okay, Emma. It's just sometimes machines fail the people who trust them most. He met Olivia's gaze, raw and honest. I walked away from all of it after that. No more hangars, no more sky, just this garage. and my girl. Olivia reached across the table and placed a hand over his. I'm so sorry, Mark. No one should have to carry that. He squeezed her hand gently, then let go and rested his chin on his folded arms. What about you? You said you lost someone too. Olivia exhaled the memory, pressing in. She took a shaky sip of milkshake and nodded. My mother, she was my biggest supporter, my fiercest advocate. I started this company because of her belief in me, but I got so wrapped up in growth and margins that I forgot who I was doing it for. When I almost died yesterday, I realized I'd lost more than my footing. I'd lost my compass. Mark's brow furrowed. And now, Olivia said, setting down her straw, I need to rebuild that compass with people who remind me what really matters. She glanced at Emma, whose pink-stained lips curved in mischief. I need to remember how to feel something other than deadlines and boardrooms. Emma hopped down to yawn. I'm beat. She reached for both parents' hands. Can we go home and watch cartoons? Of course, Mark said, his voice cracking with tenderness. He stood and scooped Emma into his arms, her small arms wrapping around his neck. Olivia rose as well, slipping into her coat. The trio made for the door, leaving coins propped on the ketchup bottle for the check. Outside, raindrops danced on the pavement, turning city lights into glittering halos. Mark pulled Emma's hood up then and offered his other hand to Olivia. She accepted it without hesitation, stepping close under his umbrella. Their shoulders brushed, and in that moment, nothing else existed. No viral videos, no corporate titles, just two people tethered by shared loss and newfound hope. Emma's sleepy voice drifted between them. I'm happy your friend's coming to my art project. Olivia looked down at her, smiling softly. Me too, Emma. Me too. Mark glanced at Olivia, his grip tightening ever so lightly. Thank you for listening, for caring. She met his eyes, the neon glow of the diner sign reflecting in her own. Thank you for letting me in. I think we're just getting started. And as they walked into the night, father-daughter and CEO turned friend, there was a sense that in this small act of shared confessions over diner burgers and milkshakes, they had forged a bond strong enough to power whatever came next. The neon buzz of the diner sign hummed overhead as Mark polished off the last of his fries, the checkered tabletop now littered with napkins and half-empty milkshake glasses. Outside, the rain had eased to a steady drizzle, soft enough to be forgotten, but persistent enough to remind them that the world beyond this booth still paused on the edge of chaos. Inside, however, time seemed to stretch an unhurried luxury in which two people could finally lower their shields. Olivia set down her own empty strawberry shake with a sigh that carried more weight than the whipped cream spilling over the rim. She smoothed a stray lock of dark hair from her face, her tailored coat bunched at her elbows. I don't usually do this, she said, voice low and honest. Open up, I mean. In boardrooms, I learned early that vulnerability is weakness. You stay poised, detached. You never let anyone see the cracks. Mark studied her profile, the flicker of neon painting her cheekbones in gentle pinks and blues. He knew the look well, the practiced composure of someone who had been forced to build walls for self-preservation. I get it, he said quietly. I used to believe that too. She looked at him, surprise flickering in her eyes. Yeah. He leaned back against the vinyl, folding his arms as if bracing himself for the confession. I was an aerospace mechanic, before all this. He gestured around the diner as if that greasy, humble world were as foreign to him as a distant planet. I worked on C-130s for the Air Guard. Pre-flight checks, engine overhauls, the whole 9 yards. I was good proud even. But then... He paused, throat tightening on a memory too sharp to swallow whole. There was a crash. A test flight. It was my job to sign off on the mechanical systems, but I missed something. I don't know how, but I did. Olivia's hand stilled on the table. The diner's hum receded as she leaned in, curiosity and concern warring in her gaze. Tell me, she urged softly. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. It was a new model, lighter, faster. We were testing altitude performance. My team and I had run the diagnostics a dozen times, but in that final climb, a fuel line rupture sent the plane into a stall. The pilot called in trouble then. Nothing. We found the wreckage miles away. 3 crew members died. His voice cracked. My wife was on board. She was the flight attendant. He opened his eyes, refusing to look away from Olivia's steady stare. They said it was a freak accident. No one blamed me publicly, but I blamed myself. I walked away from my career, from everything I loved, because I thought if I stayed, I'd break under the weight of it all. Silence stretched between them, charged and fragile. Outside, a honk punctuated the drizzle, but in their booth, the only sound was Mark's steadying breath. Olivia reached out, placing a hand over his forearm. Her touch was light, but it felt like an anchor in the tempest of his guilt. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I can't imagine what that was like." He nodded, eyes distant. It was easier to be broken than to keep pretending I wasn't. Then Emma came along. He turned his head to glance at his daughter, sleeping in the back seat of the booth's adjacent car seat, an abandoned prop after dinner. Emma's cheek rested against the plush toy she refused to leave behind. "I had to do something, so I built this garage instead. I figured if I couldn't fix lives, I could fix machines. It gave me a reason to get up in the morning." Olivia swallowed hard, her own defenses slipping away. She took a shaky breath. "My story's not as dramatic, but I lost someone too." She straightened as though gathering steel for the next admission. "My mother died of a rare heart condition when I was in college. She was my mentor, my champion, the reason I even applied to business school. After that, I threw myself into work acquisitions, mergers, scaling companies. I told myself that climbing the corporate ladder would fill the void she left." She laughed, a soft, hollow sound. "Turns out you can't replace a mother with stock options." Mark's gaze softened. "It takes a strong person to build empires. But it also takes one to admit it's not everything." Olivia's shoulders slumped with relief. "I used to think power meant control. But yesterday when I saw you throw yourself in front of that truck, that was control in its purest form. You trusted your instincts, your skill, and that you'd be willing to die for a stranger. That to me is the definition of true strength." Mark's throat bobbed as he swallowed, emotion pooling in his eyes. "I didn't think of you as a billionaire. I just saw a person in danger. No boardroom, no titles, just a life that mattered." He glanced down at the dry ketchup stain on his work-worn jeans. In that moment, none of the rest of it mattered. Olivia reached out and tucked a tendril of hair behind her ear. "And yet, so much else matters." She paused, her fingertips brushing his knuckles. "We both built walls, me around my heart, you around your talent. But here in this booth, they've come down. I've never trusted someone so quickly." Mark's lips quirked into a small, vulnerable smile. "Same here." Emma stirred, blinking awake and rubbing her eyes. She sat up, a yawn catching in her throat. "Did I miss something?" Olivia reached across the table and ruffled Emma's hair. "You're just in time for dessert." She slid a napkin toward the girl. Emma beamed, undeterred by the gravity of the conversation she'd interrupted. Mark chuckled, watching Olivia's hand linger on the napkin next to Emma's. "Thank you for listening, for caring." Olivia's eyes glistened. "Thank you for telling me, for letting me see you." Their gazes locked, and for a moment the diner's neon glow felt sacred, a witness to two souls who had shed their defenses and found in shared vulnerability an unexpected kinship. Emma clapped her hands, breaking the spell. "Can we get pancakes?" Mark laughed. "Pancakes coming right up." Olivia folded her coat around her and rose. "Don't let me keep you. I'll order at the counter." She offered Mark a nod that carried gratitude and hope. Mark stood, sweeping Emma into his arms. "Stay," he said softly, voice thick with feeling. "I'm not ready for this conversation to end." Olivia paused, then stepped back into the booth's glow. "Neither am I." She slid onto the seat beside them, and in that simple act joining father and daughter, she erased the boundary between two worlds. The waitress returned, pen poised over the check. Olivia smiled, ordering 3 stacks of pancakes, butter melting on top, and extra berries for good measure. Outside, the rain lightened into a mist, but inside, 3 people tucked into comfort food felt warm enough to weather any storm. As Mark and Olivia traded playful glances across the table and Emma dug into her blueberries, the diner's buzz resumed. Conversations floated around them, but they sat cocooned by trust, shared regret, and the fragile bloom of something new. No longer CEO and mechanic, but 2 imperfect hearts rebuilding together, one pancake at a time. That evening, the city light shimmered against the wet pavement as Mark Sullivan locked the garage door behind him. Emma, clutching her beloved sketchbook, tugged gently at his sleeve. Daddy, she murmured, are we going to see her again? Mark paused beneath the flickering street lamp, the steam from a nearby vent curling around their feet. He looked down at his daughter's hopeful eyes and managed a small smile. I think we will, he said, though in his heart he wasn't entirely certain. They walked the few blocks to Olivia Harper's sleek black sedan. The car's door swung open before Mark could reach for it. Olivia herself stood waiting, her usual executive poise softened by genuine warmth. Emma hopped in, tossing Mark a bright grin, and slid into the back seat. Mark settled beside Emma, wincing slightly as the leather stretched against his grease-stained jeans. Olivia slipped behind the wheel, the hum of the engine a steady undercurrent to her thoughtful silence. Finally she spoke. Mark, I owe you more than I can ever express. She began, her voice low enough that only he could hear. Emma craned her neck to catch her mother's eyes in the rearview mirror, but Olivia kept her gaze forward as though steeling herself for what came next. I've been thinking about what you said in the diner, that the world needs places built on heart, not just profit, and I want to help build that place. Mark swallowed against the lump in his throat. He hadn't forgiven himself for the Vega 7 accident, hadn't even dared imagine a path back into engineering, let alone a place in the corporate world. Olivia continued, turning onto the avenue that led to her headquarters' gleaming towers. I'm launching a new division at Harper Innovations. It's dedicated to ethical technology, sustainable propulsion, transparent AI protocols, safety-first design. Essentially, it's everything I wish I'd built years ago. I want you to lead it. She glanced at him as if searching his face for a flicker of reaction. Mark's mind raced with doubts. What if it was another boardroom gambit? What if Harper Innovations was just using him as a PR stunt? But Emma's voice cut through his swirl of uncertainty. Daddy, can we work with her? She asked sweetly, eyes wide in the reflection of the streetlights. Mark wrapped an arm around her heart, constricting at her trust in him. Olivia parked beneath the tower's canopy. The drop-off was silent except for the lyrics of a soft jazz tune playing on the car stereo. No pressure, she said quietly. Think of it as an invitation, not an obligation. She cut the engine, and the sudden hush felt cavernous. Mark stared at the dashboard, at the mirrored reflection of a man he hardly recognized anymore, scarred, hesitant, but perhaps ready. He cleared his throat. I don't know if I can go back, he admitted, voice rough. I walked away once because I thought I'd never forgive myself. I don't want to step into a world that nearly destroyed me. Olivia nodded, stepping out of the car. Emma followed suit, taking Olivia's hand and bouncing on her toes. Mr. Sullivan. Please, Emma chirped. You said you'd show me rockets. Mark looked down at Emma, his resolve softening at her eager face. Olivia reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a slim tablet. She tapped it, and a schematic flickered to life between them, a blueprint of a compact electric engine annotated with hand-drawn notes and safety margins. This is our first project, she said, holding it out to Mark. It's obviously still rough, but this concept could revolutionize short-haul flight. I want you to refine it, perfect it, and lead the team that brings it to life. Mark took the tablet, fingers brushing against hers. The neon glow from the tower above lit the blueprint in spectral blues and greens. He studied the lines, traced a fuel cell node, felt his old engineer's mind waking from a long slumber. The weight of the proposal pressed against him, not just a job, but a chance at redemption, a chance to protect lives through better design rather than burying guilt beneath rusted metal and faded tool marks. He raised his eyes to Olivia's expectant face. You really want me, he said, voice barely above a whisper. I need you, she corrected softly. You see the human side of this. You know what happens when systems forget the people they serve. I've built empires, but without someone like you, they can fail in the most dangerous ways. She reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. I believe in you, Mark. And if you believe in me, we can build something no one will ever regret. Mark closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. Emma tugging gently on his sleeve. When he opened them, the man reflected in the tablet's glossy screen looked back at him with a flicker of hope. He extended a hand toward Olivia. All right, he said, voice steady. I'll do it. Olivia's smile was bright enough to rival the tower's lights. Emma clapped her hands, her laughter a clear bell in the night air. Mark slipped the tablet into his work jacket, the very feel of it igniting a warmth in his chest. As they walked together into the lobby, father-daughter and CEO side by side, Mark Sullivan realized that in accepting this offer, he wasn't just rejoining the world he'd once abandoned. He was stepping into a future he never dared imagine, one built on the bedrock of courage, empathy, and second chances. Late one rainy Tuesday, Olivia stood at the head of the gleaming boardroom long table, rain tapping insistently against the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her. The board members, each with immaculate power suits and carefully neutral expressions, hovered at the edge of their seats, papers rustling like nervous whispers. She took a breath, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes trained on her. Beside her, Mark Sullivan shifted, clutching a stack of folders, overflowing with internal memos and safety reports. This was more than a meeting. It was a reckoning. Olivia cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "You've seen the headlines. Jake Carter." She paused, giving Mark a nod, "has brought forward evidence of systematic cover-ups in the Vega 7 project. We have the original safety memos that were blacklisted. We have record of suppressed tests. And we have a responsibility not just to our shareholders, but to every life that could be at risk to correct these wrongs." A hush fell. Jonathan Miles. The board's longtime chair narrowed his eyes. "You're suggesting we hand over proprietary documents to regulators? This could destroy our partnerships, tank our stock, expose us to billions in liability." His tone was low but edged with steel. It was the same tight fear Olivia saw in many boardrooms, a fear of loss over the pursuit of truth. Mark stepped forward, voice unwavering. "Yes. Because if we don't, more people could die. I lived through the aftermath of Vega 7. I lost everything. My wife, my career, because corporations chose profit over people. You can protect your balance sheets, or you can protect the public. You can't do both." He set the memos on the polished oak table, letting the gravity of each folder speak for itself. Murmurs rippled through the room. Miles's jaw twitched. "You knew the stakes when you signed the NDA," he said. "We have legal obligations to protect company confidentiality." Olivia raised a hand. "We signed a greater obligation when we put safety first into our mission statement. That promise is worthless if we fail to honor it today." She swept her gaze around the table, CFO, General Counsel, heads of R&D, all faces she had once admired, now clouded with betrayal. "I will not let Harper Innovation stand accused of complicity in a disaster that we allowed to happen. I am prepared to resign rather than conceal the truth." The room crackled with tension. Miles's eyes flicked to Mark, then back to Olivia. "You're willing to risk everything for this whistleblower." "I'm standing by him," she said simply. "Because when a man with nothing left but integrity comes forward, I want to be on the side of integrity." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Emily Wong, head of legal, cleared her throat. "We could preemptively disclose these documents to the NTSB and the Department of Transportation, control the narrative rather than be forced into it." Her suggestion rippled relief among some, but others scowled at the idea of public exposure. Olivia leaned forward. "Exactly. We'll submit the full affidavit, the memos, the test logs, everything. We'll cooperate fully. Yes, our stock may falter. Yes, we may lose contracts. But in the long term, we rebuild trust. We redefine what corporate responsibility means." Miles slammed his palm on the table. "This is corporate suicide." Mark met his glare head on. "This is moral necessity." He turned to the rest of the board. "Think about the families of those 32 victims. Think about the next generation of engineers we're training right now. Would you rather protect a quarterly profit or protect a child's life?" The words hung heavily. Miles looked at his colleagues, their faces reflecting an internal struggle. One by one, they shifted in their chairs, glancing at the folders that lay open on the table. Olivia's voice softened but remained firm. "I'm asking you to choose, do we hide behind legal shields or do we step into the light? Because I promise you this, the regulators will get these documents eventually. The public deserves to know we acted responsibly, not too late." After what felt like an hour, the room broke. Jonathan Miles sighed, shoulders slumping. "Very well," he said. "We'll authorize full disclosure, but we proceed carefully. We'll prepare a press release with our timeline, our cooperation plan, and our commitment to safety improvements. We'll manage the fallout." A reluctant chorus of assent followed. Olivia allowed herself a small, grateful smile. She looked at Mark, who nodded back with quiet pride. They had won this battle, but the war for public trust had just begun. Within 24 hours, Harper Innovations filed an unprecedented submission over 1,000 pages of internal documents accompanied by Mark's affidavit. News outlets exploded with coverage. Headlines ranged from CEO's brave stand to Billionaire Bite's corporate hand. Social media buzzed as survivors' families and aviation experts weighed in. Regulators publicly praised the full cooperation and announced a formal reopening of the Vega 7 investigation. Back in the training center garage, the place where Mark and Olivia had first truly connected, Mark wiped grease from his hands, listening to the radio report that credited Harper Innovations with setting a new standard for corporate transparency. Emma peeked around the doorframe, clutching a textbook. "Daddy, they said your boss is a hero." Mark glanced up, wiping a tear away. Olivia appeared behind him, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She handed one to Emma and the other to Mark. "And so are you," she said softly. Emma hopped onto a stool between them, the 3 of them forming a circle of quiet triumph. Olivia folded her newspaper heady with the day's events. Our stock dipped, but only briefly. She noted relief in her voice. Investors respect the honesty approach. And more importantly, the DIOT just sent word they'll be consulting with us on new safety regulations. She looked at Mark. "You helped save countless lives twice, once on the street and now in the boardroom." Mark took a slow sip of his hot chocolate, carefully savoring the warmth. "I couldn't have done any of it without you," he said. "You gave me a chance to be heard." Olivia smiled, her hand finding his across the workbench. "We gave each other that chance." Emma giggled, pointing at the grease on Mark's cheek. "Superheroes get dirty," she declared, eliciting laughter from them both. As the evening settled, the glow of the garage lights reflected off their faces, Mark's lined with relief, Olivia's softened by purpose, Emma's shining with pride. The world outside was still buzzing over the dramatic turnaround at Harper Innovations, but here in this humble workshop, 3 lives intertwined in a testament to what happens when courage meets conviction. In that unassuming space of grease and heated metal, they celebrated not only a corporate victory, but a victory of integrity over convenience, and a new blueprint for how business and humanity could build something better together. Sunlight streamed through the high windows of the newly unveiled Harper Sullivan Training Center, dancing across rows of gleaming workbenches and overhead ducting that housed fume hoods and ventilation for every experiment imaginable. The center's sign, bold cobalt letters against weathered bricks, spelled out a promise: hands-on lab, build, tinker, dream. Beneath that promise, laughter and conversation rose in harmonious buzz. Mark Sullivan stood near the entrance, wiping grease from his hands on a clean rag, yet somehow still glowing with pride. Around him, clusters of teenagers bent over red and white model airplanes, wiring circuits, calibrating engine mock-ups, and soldering sensors. Their eyes shone with curiosity, the same spark Mark once felt in his own heart before tragedy knocked him off course. Emma bounded up her ponytail, swinging like a metronome as she carried a small toolbox twice her weight. "Daddy, look," she said, opening the lid to reveal her latest creation, a miniature drone with paper airplane wings. Mark knelt beside her, marveling at the precision of her design. "That's incredible, Emmy," he said. "You engineered lift with wings of whimsy." She beamed, pride radiating from her. Behind them, Olivia Harper moved gracefully through the space, clipboard in hand, but her attention fully on the students. She paused at a workbench where 2 girls calibrated a robotic arm, offering quiet guidance. "Try adjusting the servo's pulse width by 10 microseconds. See how that smooths the movement." One girl nodded, sent the command, and the arm glided through its paces, earning high fives from her partner. Olivia smiled, remembering her own first breakthroughs in an aerodynamics lab long before boardrooms and balance sheets. A group of middle schoolers clustered around a transparent water tank at the far end, testing 3D printed hulls for small submersibles. Their instructor, Javi, a former trainee turned apprentice teacher, coached them. "Remember Reynolds' number changes with viscosity. Let's increase the nozzle diameter by 2 millimeters and rerun the demo." The kids exchanged determined looks and got to work, overtaken by genuine excitement. Mark moved to his own demonstration area, where a half-assembled combustion assist engine prototype rumpled under a protective cover. Tapping the cover aside, he addressed a circle of students. "Today we'll learn how to integrate hybrid power systems electric startup. Then a short burst thermal boost. It's the future of short-haul flight. He glanced at Olivia, who gave an encouraging nod. In that glance was the unspoken acknowledgement they had built this together from the wreckage of past failures to this living testament to possibility. Emma tugged on her father's sleeve. "Can I show them my drone?" Mark smiled. "Lead the way, Chief Engineer." Emma marched over to a workbench where a group of younger kids watched in awe. With practiced confidence, she plugged her drone's battery into the test station, tapped a touchscreen, and the little aircraft lifted on invisible currents, hovering steadily. "We optimized the wing's angle of attack for maximum lift, with minimal power," she announced. The children erupted in applause. Some took feverish notes. Emma's cheeks flushed with delight. Olivia joined them. "You're an amazing teacher," she told Emma, who shrugged shyly. "I learned from the best," Emma said, glancing between her parents. Mark wrapped an arm around his daughter. "And you learned from a great CEO," he whispered to Olivia, who returned his smile with a warmth that transcended words. A sudden cheer rose from the courtyard beyond the main hall, drawing their attention to the glass exterior doors. Outside, under fluttering paper airplanes hung from cables like kites caught in time, a crowd had gathered for the center's first community open day. Local families, elected officials, and press members milled around sampling interactive stations, a wind tunnel where visitors could test their own paper planes. A Design Your Dream booth, where children sketched inventions on digital tablets, and a virtual reality flight simulator that put users in a 360-degree cockpit view. Olivia walked out into the sunlit courtyard, Mark following with Emma in tow. She raised a hand and the murmurs quieted. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice carrying easily over the plaza. 1 year ago, this space was just a rusty warehouse. Today, it's a home for hope and hands-on learning. We believe that talent exists in every corner of our city, regardless of zip code or background. Here we break down the barriers to innovation. She gestured at the activity around them. Under these very rafters, we launch dreams into motion, just like those paper airplanes above you. Let's keep them flying. Applause rippled through the crowd as she stepped aside for Mark, who stepped forward, Emma by his side. He cleared his throat. "I'm no CEO. I'm a dad and a mechanic who once thought his life ended in a crash. But thanks to a CEO who refused to let me disappear and a community that believed in second chances, I learned that the greatest thing you can rebuild is yourself and then lift others skyward." He motioned to Emma, who handed out small model plane kits to the first-row children. "Our first class of apprentices, this place belongs to you now." The kits flew through the air, landing in little hands, faces alight with possibility. Olivia joined him, their families and students hemming them in with admiration. She slipped an arm around his waist. "We didn't just land a hero," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. "We launched a community's hope." Mark's eyes shimmered with gratitude. "And we'll keep launching," he replied, voice steady. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the courtyard filled with impromptu paper plane contests, laughter, and the hum of excitement. Emma took her father's free hand and they both raised theirs to cast a final paper airplane together, watching it catch the breeze and soar beyond the center's walls, a symbol of all they'd built. Around them, the Harper Sullivan Training Center stood as proof that from acts of courage